Muted. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Talking Timepieces, where we talk about watch collecting and horology. Actually, I realized I was in such a hurry, I forgot my hat. And so I guess you get to see me without a hat today. But I also forgot to turn on some of these lights. Let me turn on the light here. Got to have good lights. Otherwise, it's hard for people to see you. But today I wanted to talk about some of the new releases from Watches and Wonders and talk about any other topic because, of course, everybody is talking about Watches and Wonders and they're belaboring it quite heavily. Okay, good. I do have my indoor glasses on. I'm a little discombobulated. My lady friend just left, so I didn't have as much time to prepare for the show as I normally do. But we haven't seen each other in almost a month between her travel and my travel. As you probably know, I was in Atlanta and I was in Nuremberg and the like. I'll be in Canada later this month. But, you know, better to be too busy in a world where not being busy means you're probably not making any money. What are you going to do? Dr. Bob Nightmare, all those watches, and he's still late. I was typing the answer. I had sat down to start the show, and I had seen that you had asked about me being in Geneva. And while I was typing the answer, the time slipped past 10 o'clock. But as you all know, I love this live stream, and I've been very busy lately. But I've always managed to at least do the live stream, except for the 2 weekends I was doing some heavy travel. I love this show, and I love the community that we're building, and I love all of you, and I'm really glad that we can do this together. These are dirty as heck. Because I need to be able to read all of these comments. I always love it when we get a good conversation rolling and people are asking questions and we talk about stuff. Because I definitely wanted to talk about the new Rolex release, Ez, primarily the Land-Dweller. And I also wanted to talk about the new Nomos World Timer. And hi, Elusive Man. And of course, Dr. Bob and Damon and Warren and Carter. Hi, everybody. Hey, greetings from Chicago. Greetings from Wiesbaden, Germany. So, um, you know, one of the interesting things about the Land-Dweller is I kind of I have the grandfather of the Land-Dweller. I have an oyster quartz. So essentially, the Land-Dweller is resurrecting kind of this case. It's not. It's more of a the Land-Dweller is more of a AP style of a case, but it does have the integrated lug design similar to this, and it is going for more of a Jubilee style bracelet. But it's definitely echoing the oyster quartz, and that's how they can also say, well, they're not just hobby horsing onto the integrated bracelet craze, but Rolex issuing an integrated bracelet means that pretty much it's peaked. The most conservative companies are releasing integrated bracelets again, and mine's also a display back because I think the oyster quartz is such an interesting movement. It's totally worth putting a display back on. In fact, Rolex decorated this to a higher level than some of the other pieces in the collection at the time because they wanted to distance it from you know other quartz watches. It's an electromechanical movement. It has more in common with the spring drive than a G-Shock, let's put it that way. But the new Land-Dweller, I think, is a great addition. I think the name Land-Dweller is a little clunky, but I know it was being begged for with Sea Dweller and Sky Dweller, but they could have just left Land-Dweller alone and called it something completely different. Um, Land-Dweller's not horrible, but I don't know. I think they could have gotten away with just simply calling it a different variation on the date just almost. and save themselves a line of text on the face and make it a little cleaner face, you know? What are your thoughts on that? Carter, what do tariffs means for watches in the US? Well, luckily I live here. No, that's a mean thing to say. I think what's gonna happen is the internal used market, uh, new old stock market, the merchandise on hand in the States, you're gonna see probably more vintage selling, but if you're the kind of person who wants that Daytona, you're gonna buy that Daytona, and frankly, when you think of the market markups, the tariffs aren't that much bigger than some of the premiums that dealers are laying on, Pateks or, yeah, APs. So, because we're living in the new gilded age in one sense, there are gonna be people who have the money to buy the watch, and they're not gonna care how much it costs, you know? Um, I think for the average collector, like, I'm very, very, lucky to have been, able to say that I can buy things here inside the EU, but Switzerland, for example, is not inside the EU, but at least we don't have any punitive tariffs with them. But frankly, since I picked up my, silver Snoopy wristwatch check wearing, I love this watch, and I'm gonna have a custom strap made for it. Meant to go last weekend, but it hadn't worked out time-wise. Um, I'm pretty much not looking right now for anything, but if you are looking and you're living in the States right now with the tariffs, I would say go to a local shop and buy something nice and vintage. And don't forget, vintage is only 20 some odd years. 25, I think, is official. Um, you're talking about watches that were made in the 90s, using modern technology, right? The oils are modern blends, you buy a watch that was made in the 90s, you're not gonna be disappointed, and I say right now would be a good time to buy vintage. And I don't know if vintage prices will creep up because I think the dealers are happy to be getting rid of some of their, less desirable vintage pieces. But it could go either way. What are your thoughts on that? Dr. Bob, the new dual impulse escapement is crazy cool. Well, a lot of people are doing that nowadays. Like I had a really good chat with Bernhard Lederer at Geneva Watch Days less than a year ago, but last year's Geneva Watch Days. Um, and they've got a double remontoire in their pieces, in their higher end pieces. When you think about double escapements, double remontoires, double, you know, tourbillons, there's some the the nice thing about watchmaking is even the extreme examples of excess, as long as they're in the realm of horology, they're at least mechanically appealing. You can at least say, "Wow, it may be useless, but five tourbillons and a lunar time display, at least it shows you know your math and can build precision devices, and that's always useful." But yeah, there's some really beautiful movements out there in the industry. I mean, it's one of the things I love about the Snoopy. And for those of you who haven't seen the back of the Snoopy, I'll hold it up close. So you've got the Snoopy on the front, and in the back, it's sapphire back, and it's laser etched with the moon, and then the Earth is traveling on top of the escapement wheel, so it's constantly rotating. And as you see, I've got the stopwatch running, so you can see the little Apollo spacecraft with Snoopy inside traversing the sky, and it's on a little transparent stick. I don't know if it's plastic or sapphire. I'd like to think it was sapphire, but I wouldn't mind if it were plastic because, I mean, come on, can't go too far with something like that. and probably sapphire because it would retain higher stiffness. You never know, but just a beautiful piece. But if you're talking about this right now in the States, I would totally go vintage. Pick up because the black-faced Snoopy Speedmaster is not as popular as the white-faced, the 25th anniversary, which now I think is bouncing around the 40 to $50,000 range, but you can still pick up the black Snoopy. I think it was the 15th anniversary, I forget, but it has the black face and it's got the Snoopy on in an illustration on the reverse side, and I've seen that for like only 13 to 15,000. Um, but I would say right now vintage is the way to go because the market's still soft on used watches. The money is still a little scared, so it's still a buyer's market. Now's a good time to Presbyterian down your local jeweler and get that 36 millimeter Rolex Oyster date just with the leather strap, and then put on a nice alligator on it or some other exotic skin and have some fun with it. Yeah, I would say right now in the States it's vintage watch time because who knows when the storm's going to pass. We'll see. Dr. Bob's, it looks great for quartz movement. Well, the oyster quartz certainly does. I mean, because it's a hybrid, that hybrid mechanical effect, just like FP Jordan did a hybrid mechanical quartz watch, and Seiko spring drive is hybrid mechanical. Um, Johnny, hey Johnny, my friend, Damon, Damon Stratos, Rolex adding the silicon hairspring will lose a lot of purists. Yeah, but Rolex never cared about us anyway. I mean, I don't call myself a purist because I do. I think that silicon technology is very useful, and yes, you have to replace instead of repair, but it's an industrial process. There's going to be you can still get replacement parts for an Accutron, first generation. You'll be able to get hairsprings unless the planet is destroyed. And frankly, in 20 years, you'll be able to use your micro 3D printer and make, the replacement hairspring yourself out of whatever material you choose at that point. I don't think because for example, Watch Sai, right? I respect him a lot. And he was used to be blanket, I don't like silicon parts, but he's cool with silicon escapement wheels and pallet forks. Um, and they're lightweight and no need for lubrication and amagnetism. And his big thing with silicon hairsprings is that, yeah, if it really is a messed up hairspring, you can't, bend it or solder it, or it's just a piece of glass. It's going to break, and you have to replace it. It can't be repaired. And I can respect that. I can respect that argument. My counter argument though is I don't believe that will be a real situation because yeah, we're talking. I got photographs in my archive. You can go look. They're making, 50 on a wafer at a time, and it's an industrial process. They probably have thousands of these things floating around, and there'll be parts for the foreseeable future. I mean, and again, like I said, beyond that point, you'll be able to 3D print your own replacement hairspring, or at least your watchmaker will have a good enough printer to 3D print because I think the better micro 3D printing gets, the more you're going to see watchmakers start servicing older pieces, things with very hard to get parts, because they'll just make them themselves on site. But yeah, I'm not I'm not against silicon parts, and Rolex could care less about purists. They don't care about purists. They don't care about collectors. They care about money. Well, actually, they are a charitable trust, but they care about sales. They care about their image. They care, and as long as that new CEO of XYZ startup runs to the watch store to buy a Rolex as an aspirational purchase, we could bitch about silicon hairsprings all day, and they honestly wouldn't care. I do think that they were worried about purists and why they kept them out of the for such a long time, but the movement that we're talking about in the Land Dweller is such an advanced horological statement. They're like, "Okay, yeah, it's silicon parts, but look at what we accomplished. Look how long the power reserve is. Look how accurate it is. Look how, well it is designed." And so they decided to roll hard in the direction of the advanced technology. And it is an amagnetic watch. You could, well, obviously it's got a metal case, so that you couldn't like wear it in a high Gauss, high Tesla field anyway. But if you accidentally had it exposed, let's say you're an engineer and you get a micro burst of magnetism that would like screw other ferrous based hairsprings, your watch wouldn't even notice it. You know, you, 10, 12,000 Gauss, not even an issue. My El Primero Chronomaster, Zenith has been using silicon pallet forks and escapement wheels and hairsprings for a long time, and they're doing high beat, and they were able to increase their warranty period. All right, because the ability to reduce the need for lubrication on high wear parts like a pallet fork and escapement wheel does a lot for the longevity of the piece. So it then becomes a balance, I guess. Do you want that future proofness of having a metal hairspring, or do you want, for the foreseeable civilization, having just a really cool watch? I mean, in a situation where you're not going to be able to find a silicon hairspring for it might be a specific case, but since these are mass produced, I'm almost positive that they'll all fit into all of the. It's not like they have different hairsprings for different pieces. You, like I was saying, you can get it's inside. It's in the case. You can get a Accutron tuning fork Accutron fixed today with factory parts because there were enough parts floating around that certain watchmakers hoarded them, and there's at least one or two on every continent. Like I had my my Omega Speed Sonic serviced at the Accutron doctor in Tokyo, and it was worth it. It was worth it. He replaced the base plate even, um, you know, which means they have those parts still available out there. And so, yes, it's a purist concern, but I don't think it is one that will impact their sales, Rolex's sales. Um, I don't think going to silicon hairspring has impacted Omega's sales much. You know, something to think about. Santa Claus, hey, hey, elusive man, not a fan of the Land Dweller at all. Well, like I was saying, in one sense, the Land Dweller is just the oyster quartz, because they had a variation of the oyster quartz with, I mean, well, like, obviously, it wasn't a variation of the oyster quartz if it had a mechanical movement, but there was a Rolex available in that case in a mechanical movement. It just wasn't. They didn't make that many. That's all. But essentially, at the end of the day, we're talking about an integrated bracelet Rolex with the Land Dweller, right? And when you think about that aspect of, like I said, number one, integrated bracelets have peaked. If Rolex is an integrated bracelet now, then it's peaked because there's who else, who else doesn't have an integrated bracelet at this point? If you don't have an integrated bracelet at this point, you don't want one. Everybody's got an integrated bracelet at this point. I shouldn't say everybody because Nomos, they just released, like, this is as close as they're going to get to an integrated bracelet, because they used to do a straight metal end link, and it didn't conform to the case. So just having it conform to the case is big for them. But they just came out with a this case size, this style Neomatic, it with a world timer function in it, with the extra pusher to change the dates, which they have a world timer out there. I think it's the Zurich model, and it's really beautiful. Uh, and to have now a daily wear sports version of that world timer, I think is really good for them because there are people who travel and are a little rough on their gear who would appreciate a watch of this quality and ruggedness with a world timer 24 hour, world timer functionality. Dr. Bob, Bill Sanders told me the devil makes silicon hairsprings out of Lucifer's pubes. Just saying. Yeah, yeah, well, it like I said, I can respect the arguments against silicon hairsprings. I really can. I just I think it's a manifestation of advanced technology enabling higher levels of performance. I mean, because Rolex does have their non-ferrous metal hairspring technology, and yet they chose not to use it in the Land-Dweller. You know. Oh, speaking of integrated case pieces, among some of the watches I'm trying to sell, I guess I should have a episode watches I'm trying to sell, because especially now that I have this, I have so many pieces that I genuinely like, but I don't wear very often because I don't have that many opportunities to. Like the PRX. I mean, this is a D-lugs strap, because interestingly enough, you can buy all kinds of straps for the three-handers, but the chrono has a different lug width, and so you can't put the quick release straps from the three-hander on the chrono. But the D-lugs strap, I really, really like it. It was a pain to put on because it's not an integrated spring pin, but it's doable, and it's got a spring tension deployant. And as I was saying, the spring pins are not integral, so you have to slide the spring pin in while you're pushing it up inside. It's kind of a difficult fit, but I did get it to fit, and I do like it a lot on the strap. And so integrated strap watches are going to be a subculture for the foreseeable future, in my humble opinion. Especially, like I said, now that they've got the Land Dweller, and there are a lot of people who want the Land Dweller because the Land Dweller is cool and new. And if you were if you really do like an integrated bracelet, and you didn't want to get an AP, you can get this and you can hang with your friend at the pool with his AP or her AP, and wear your Rolex Land-Dweller, and they can't go, "Oh, you're wearing, XYZ piece," because even a date just compared to, say, an AP is a different style of watch entirely. Rolex didn't really have anything that went in that direction, Nautilus, AP, integrated bracelet realm, and now they have one with the Land Dweller, you know? And, uh, a few other there were some other interesting pieces, the Nomos, like I was saying, the World Timer, and just some interesting watches being released right now. But what have you seen that you've, been impressed with lately? Hey, Eric Mack. Elusive Man. Now that Nomos World Timer, actually wearing my Omega World Timer AT, the Aquaterra. It's a big one. The proportion of the Nomos is perfect. Well, but that Aquaterra is a nice piece too. That's a beautiful watch also. And but the Nomos is a lovely piece. All of the various color combos that they were offering, I think that you're going to find people to buy them all because they were all limited, right? So someone wants a lime green watch, they're going to buy it because it'll match their lime green car or whatever. There are going to be people out there who will snap that stuff up. I think my next live stream, I'm going to talk about color, because there are companies that'll give you color for free, different colored watches for the same price. And then there are companies that'll charge you extra just to make the watch a different color. I'd love to get your ideas on that. We'll use that to anchor an episode in the next week or two. Johnny, always wondered, does my chiming pocket watch have a shock system? I will open it up and I will look, but I don't know off the top of my head. But 1890s, I doubt, because I think Inca Block wasn't invented until the 50s, maybe. So I would say, at a guess, no, there's no shock system in it, but I'll look. It might have some kind of system, but I doubt it has a spring kind of shock system. It just might have a very robust, um, chaton around it or something. But yeah, I'll look. Can't hurt to look. But at a guess, I would say no. Dr. Bob, been looking at these vintage Tudor Rolex Oyster Perpetuals. They look really cool. Well, when you're collecting vintage old school Tudor, you're essentially collecting vintage Rolex, right? Because a lot of them had Rolex parts. They may have had not had Rolex movements, but they had Rolex cases, Rolex crowns, bracelets, all of that other stuff. So, and it was Hans Wilsdorf way of putting Rolex quality in the finish, the cases, the bracelets, waterproof and all, at a lower price point, to enable people who didn't have Rolex money to buy a nice watch. And that's benefited Rolex now, because as Rolex is trying to go to the luxury market, right? As Rolex is rolling upstream, um, they've allowed Tudor to become what Rolex used to be: reasonably priced tool watches that looked good. And Tudor has now become Rolex, and Rolex is trying to become one of the triumvirate, quadrumvirate. I don't know, whatever the four works out to be. Four big guys with big pope kind of hats, I guess. Uh, Elusive man. Yes, they are a charitable trust. Rolex has some balls. The propaganda machine they've going all these years of them on top, unfortunately. Well, Hans Wilsdorf, when his wife died of, I think, cancer, he set up a charity for, what killed her, right? If it's cancer, it was cancer. I forget what killed her, but basically he set up a charitable trust when she died, and he died childless. So there were no Wilsdorfs to leave the company to. So he basically willed the company to the charitable trust that he had originally set up, for his wife's medical condition. So the the thing about that is that it can give the appearance of oddness, because, like, oh, they're trying to hide something, but no, they're actually not trying to hide something. They have nothing to hide. They're a Swiss charitable trust. The Swiss go over their books with a fine-tooth comb on a regular basis, and they spend that money well. They build hospitals and they build schools in Switzerland. They do a lot of charitable work. You could look up the work they do. And not having to worry about the next quarter's stock price gives you a freedom of mind that no other company in its category on the planet has. Every other company of its size is looking at the next quarter, the next month, 5 years if they're smart. Rolex is looking at 100 years down the road, because they don't care about money in that sense. They don't need to. So it's not that they're playing games with the market by having this charitable trust and hiding stuff. They're using the freedom of being a charitable trust to not worry about the crap that the corporate world has to worry about. That's why they can do things like be very conservative, allow Tudor to do, interesting, risky things, but they're thinking about the brand long, long range. That's why they don't care as much about not having as much to sell as the demand. They know that the people are going to buy their product, and they're making enough money. They can pay their board of directors a lot of money before the charitable trust starts losing a lot, you know? So I don't think they're hiding anything. I think they're just taking advantage of the situation that they were given when Hans Wilsdorf established them as a nonprofit company. It gives them so much freedom and power. You don't need to play shenanigans. You really don't. If I don't have to worry about eating every day and you do, I will outlast you any any day of the week. Then Rolex doesn't have to worry about that. They have a dispassionate view of the future, and that's a power in and of itself. One that we would wish we would have in our personal lives. I mean, it is a tremendous advantage to not have to worry about results. I mean, they worry about results, but not in the sense, like I said, of short term. They're worried about what their brand's going to do in 100 years. They really are. Will the people on the space shuttle to Jupiter in the first class section be wearing Rolexes? They better. Dr. Bob, the land dweller is growing on me. I really thought it was an April Fool's joke at first, though. Well, I think because that came up in conversation. I think that Rolex deliberately leaked to circumvent leaks because probably either figured it was going to leak or maybe they had evidence it might leak, and they thought, okay, well then let's leak it ourselves, and then we can at least control the leak. Or they leaked it just to preempt leaks. But this is a world with no secrets. In order to have a secret today, you have to have people with the laptops without wireless chained to their wrists, escorted by armed guards at all times, and then maybe it won't leak. So I think Rolex was just jumping ahead of the leak, and because of the timing, it looked like an April Fool's joke. But I like the Land Dweller. It's doing a lot. I'm not a big fan of the face, but we all know that they're going to put out different faces over time. They'll be a big hoorah and ooh, now in blue, ooh, but the blue's only available in white gold. Because they're not stupid. But yeah, so we'll see other faces with the Land Dweller. We'll see other styles. We'll probably see a Land Dweller day date. Why not? I wouldn't be surprised if we see everything in the Land Dweller case eventually, but Rolex isn't that, they don't roll that hard. For the next 3 years, we're going to see different face designs, and that'll be all we're going to see from the Land Dweller. And then maybe a day date in 3 to 5 years. But they have all the time in the world. As I was just saying, they have all the time in the world. Elusive Man, maybe when they release a differential dial on the Land Dweller, those release dials are disgusting. Relief, I'm guessing you're saying. We'll see what they release in time. Well, if they, yeah, like I said, they're going to eventually have a sunburst or enamel or whatever. When you think about something like the oyster quartz, they only made about 20,000 of these, but I've seen them I've seen them in day date. I've seen them in gold. I've seen them in only steel. I've seen them with white faces. I've seen them with blue faces. I've seen them with black faces, and they only made 20,000. So the chance that they're going to release this Land Dweller with different faces and different colors and different motifs, I say are very high, very high. Hey, Movement Mensch, how's it going? Happy Sunday to you as well, my friend. Dr. Bob, I think Engelblock was post World War II as well. Exactly. So yeah, so this I'm not even going to bother to look now because I'm thinking 1890s is no way because it's in 1890s, and it's a quarter repeater and it's made of brass. So it was a working man's watch. Rich people had minute repeaters. If you're a police sergeant, all you needed is a quarter repeater because that's close enough to the time you needed to be on the wharf at night. And the reason you carried a repeater in those days is because they didn't have luminescent paint and you needed to know what time it was and there's no light. So yeah, I really like it's right there. Johnny, shock system started in 1950s. Exactly. Dr. Bob, I like the dual Rolex Tudor branding on the dial. Looks like a mod watch. Yeah, well, see, that's the nice thing about those kinds of interesting early day pieces, first steps and stuff like Seiko and Grand Seiko. I think they even put Seiko on some of the Crador pieces. Some of those early steps watches are collectible because they show the history of that brand and that family line. Elusive Man, exactly. That's what I mean. They're not on an even competitive field. Therefore, they don't give a shit about the watch collectors and therefore the populace that actually purchase watches. Well, Watch collectors and the populace that purchases watches are two different groups, right? Because sadly, there are a lot of d bags and people who are buying that watch to flex, or honest people. I shouldn't say that, because if you're going to flex, nothing's wrong with flexing. But people who are buying it for an aspiration, like just graduated, I want to buy a Rolex or whatever. Those are the people who are buying Rolexes. We collectors are a small percentage of that market, and they so their advantage is more against the other companies, is not against us, because you don't see AP worrying about mainstream public purchasers, collectors. You Who collects APs? APs are for people with money, real money, you know. But I see where you're coming from, though, Hector. I mean, um, it is a bit of an arrogant position, and that's one of the reasons I have a love-hate relationship with Rolex, because they are a bit of snooty, but they do make luxury products, and they make good luxury products. I mean, I really, really do like. I have the ceramic. I had it upside down. I've got the ceramic 41. I really like this piece. And when I got the Snoopy, I initially thought, well, I'm never going to wear this Rolex. Now I got this awesomely cool piece. But I realized, I put it on. I still need a diver, not because I dive, but you know what I mean? I still want a diver in my collection. Why not this one? And it's a good balance to this one. And it's really a nice watch. So yes, the company's a bit of a pain, but they do make nice pieces. It's hard, it's the dike. Do you separating the artist from the art, as it were? I like Edge of Tomorrow. Tom Cruise, yeah, he's got issues, but he makes fantastic movies. Elusive man, I find it repulsive, but that's me. I digress. No, but that's okay. Like I said, I can respect where you're coming from with that. I really can, and I can understand. Um, it's just I see it a little differently, but I do recognize and I respect your position on this. Johnny, surprising that Rolex never did a heritage model. Their 1920, 1930 models were nice, or mighty nice. Well, that's where you got to look towards Tudor. Tudor is going to probably go through Rolex's back catalog completely eventually. And the most successful things Rolex is going to incorporate into the Rolex line. They're using Tudor as a good, experimental field, skunk works, as it were. And they're getting some good traction there, I think. And Tudor does have a heritage and does make good watches. And now they even have their own in-house movements. HRM, hey, how's it going? The new Chopard Quattro release made me look into the older models. You can find the older ones for around 10K. They retailed at 35. The Chopards, well, yeah, because Chopard suffers from the biggest problem all the watch companies suffer from. They're not Rolex, right? So if the average person hasn't heard of them, their values aren't as stable, because, as we were saying a couple of minutes ago, right? Collectors aren't enough of a market to support your brand. You want the mainstream to want to spend that big money for your pieces. And so once the show part leaves the room, it's like a Cadillac rolling off the lot with the same loss in value. The advantage behind watches, though, is once they hit a certain level, odds are they'll stay at that value for the foreseeable future, the rest of their marketable lives, as it were. But yeah, and as I was saying, now's the time to go out and buy vintage in the US of A, because with the tariffs and new products are going to be expensive. Now's the time to go to your watch dealer before they realize that, well, they probably realize it by now, but still, they can't jack up the prices on the vintage stuff that much. But now's the time to buy that vintage Speedmaster, that vintage, that 36 millimeter, like I said, that 36 millimeter date just with the leather strap. You can get one of them at a good price, and the used prices are still soft right now. So that's what I would do, in my humble opinion. But yeah, Chopard is totally worth the money. Formula Whiplash. Hey, I saw your post yesterday while I was literally driving home with my new sub date for the AD. Fun coincidence. Yeah, yeah. So Rolex can be a pain in the butt, but they do make nice watches. And I'm now I'm really stoked because now that I've the my oyster quartz has been redeemed with the land dweller. Rolex is acknowledging the design heritage of the only other integrated bracelet they had. Like I said, they had the variation of this with the automatic in it, but basically the oyster quartz was the only real integrated bracelet piece that Rolex ever made. And now that they brought it back in the land dweller, so I could actually, I don't need to pretend because I really do like the oyster quartz. And if you hadn't come in early enough in the show, I have it on. I put a display back on it so you can see the hybrid mechanical electromechanical movement. Really is a nice piece, and I do commend Rolex for putting a display back on the land dweller because yeah, it puts it into the top categories of. I mean, the land dweller can go toe to toe with the AP. It really can. The AP is not that much better finished, uh, and the Rolex has got a more advanced movement now. What are you going to do? I could afford. Well, that's a lot of money, and I just dropped that kind of money on the Snoopy. It'll be another 2 years before I could afford something of that caliber, but yeah, to say start a war chest now, in 2 years, they'll have different faces and maybe other, complications, you never know. Uh, Maybe even a small second version or something. Grab a movement from the Da Vinci line. But, yeah, the, Land Dweller, I think, is here to stay and is gonna get some good traction, in my humble opinion. Not so humble opinion. Elusive Man. Chopard released some amazing pieces. The Alpine Eagle Platinum, but 110K for and JLC's reversals are amazing as well. Well, yeah, once you're up in that atmosphere, once you're at that altitude, there are a lot of good alternatives. Case in point, right? These watches are worth roughly the same, roughly, right? But they're completely different pieces. There are a lot of deals out there. But it also depends on your taste, right? Because one man's fish is another man's poisson, and what you love may turn off someone else, and what someone else loves may turn you off. So that deal is something that is a personal hunt. But there's a lot of really nice Chopard watches out there, and if I had that kind of money lying around, I would pick up an Alpine Eagle if I could find one at a good price. They're nice watches, they really are. Or maybe I'd get a Millimiglia. The Millimiglia is a nice piece. I'm not a big fan of the tire track rubber strap, but you can always replace the strap. But there are some variations on the Millimiglia I like, but those are the base Chopard, not Chopard LUC. But who cares? I mean, people care, but you know what I mean. Johnny recently tried a titanium Oris. Wow, talk about light. Oris makes some nice pieces, and titanium's light. Oris, in fact, at Watches and Wonders, Oris released a new line of their pointer dates. Some people like pointer dates over window date because a pointer date gives you an idea of where you are in the month as well, because the pointer rolls around the whole face for the month. So, you can see the number 10, but then when you see the pointer, a third of the way around the dial, you go, wow, I'm a third of the way into the month. It does give you a different perspective on time. I like those pointer dates from Oris. Actually, I like a lot from Oris. They make some good watches. HRM, just got my Seiko UTD back from the watchmaker. Forgot how insanely thin it is. Only 5.7 millimeters thick. That is thin, including case back and crystal. Has Seiko's last hand assembled, adjusted, and decorated movement, the 6810. Good for you. That's a nice watch for keeping a collection. And that's a thin piece. That's a thin piece. Um, good on you. HRM again. Can sometimes find the first generation Chopard Alpine Eagle 8 HFs for the same price as a normal Alpine Eagle. The 8 HF has an 8 hertz movement. Oh, good point. The faster movement's always a little more accurate or precise. I guess accuracy. Well, accuracy and precision are two different things. Accuracy is how close you are to the center of the target. Precision is how tight your shot group is. Dr. Bob's Nightmare. I tried on the lime green Kermit at Johnny Arsenal. It is extremely light. That Kermit Oris is a fun watch, and I can't say anything negative about it. It's a nice piece. And if I saw someone wearing it, I would compliment them on their purchase because it is a pretty watch. The movement mensch. How are we feeling about the tariffs affecting prices if not already discussed? Pretty embarrassed by my country at present. I'm going to leave the politics out of it, and we'll just talk about the tariffs aspect. We did talk about it earlier, but I have no problem, bringing it up again because there are people who come in and out of the show. The way I see it with the tariffs is that it's going to make it tougher to buy new stuff, but it's a soft used market. Now's the time to buy that used piece because with the new prices expensive, yeah, go get that 36 millimeter Rolex with the leather strap. Go get that, Apollo 17 Speedmaster. Go get. There are some really good deals in the vintage market, and I would say if you're in the States right now, I would I would shop vintage, and that would avoid the tariff issues. And there are a lot of used watches in the marketplace, and with the current financial uncertainty, I don't think that the used market is going to get any harder because it's soft right now. You know, you can buy a no date sub for like 13,000 new, like ceramic bezel. That same watch 2 years ago was 19. Rolex used prices are bumping along the retail price ceiling. And if it's a non-popular piece, you can get one at retail, used. So it's a soft market right now for used pieces, and that's what I would recommend with the tariffs. I would recommend now's the time to buy that vintage piece you were thinking of, but you thought, but I did want the new piece, but now the new piece might be more expensive. Or what the trouble is that companies like Shinola and the like, unless it's one of the American companies that do their own stuff, you're still going to have tariff sting because companies like Shinola get their movements from other places. They don't make their movements themselves. So yeah, now's the time to shop vintage. I had said at the beginning of the year it's a buyer's market in the gray market. Used watches. The prices may stiffen up, but I don't think they're going to go up. Even though the watch prices are going to go up, but now's the time to buy a vintage piece, in my humble opinion, or not so humble opinion, as I've said many a time. Elusive Man, I'm with you, Movement Mensch. Johnny, anything new from Chinese chiming watch? I'm waiting for that myself. I heard Seagull's going to make either a sonnery or a repeater. The sonnery, in one sense, would be easier, like the way the Christopher Ward, because you can have a tripping mechanism that goes every hour that would then activate, some kind of a module. A repeater would be harder because it would have to read out the hour, which would mean you'd have to have a cam or a gear specifically for that. HRM, tariffs might drive manufacturers towards localized assembly the way they can bypass tariffs, just like they used with pocket watches. Well, localized manufacture as well, because if they're still going to charge a tariff on that movement, it would reduce your overall overhead to do more assembly in-house, but you would still be buying parts from a field. Now that's part of their goal, I'm assuming, but now would be a time to set up a small manufacturing facility for movements. The nice thing about that is you wouldn't need a high worker count because you'd basically have to just like put 5-6 CNC machines in a room and have them grind out watch parts and then send those parts to those companies to need them to be assembled. So Who knows? It might turn into some more local growth. I always, I don't wish bad on anybody who has a different policy. I hope it works. But now would be the time to open up an American movement shop, if at any time. Santa Claus, maybe we seeing a Cyberchild sequel anytime soon. I'm working on it. I keep getting more work, and the old saying, "The cobbler's children have no shoes." By the way, the latest edition of Power Electronics magazine came out, and I just took over as editor in chief of that last year, and so I am working on a sequel. Trust me, it's going to be nice. And the nice thing about the procrastination is I keep thinking of new elements because the technology is moving forward as we're thinking about it. You know, I used AI in the first book, but in my second, one of the characters is going to be AI. Totally, is going to be an AI, an illegal AI. It's too smart for the law. Because I do believe, and I've said this professionally, I do believe that they're going to bin AI the way they do it with ADAS, with self-driving. Level one AI would be what you'd have in a thermostat. Level three AI is maybe what you'll have in your phone. Level five AI, you have to have a license and only governments and corporations. And level six AI, they delete the AI and they delete you. I think we're gonna AI is like the internet. If the government knew then, when it was still the ARPANET, what it knows now, they would never have allowed student interns anywhere near that equipment. They would have need retina scans and fingerprint readers to just let anybody get close to those computers, because the internet came from the ARPANET, which was an information weapon created by the government to make sure that messages got through in a disrupted environment like nuclear war or whatever. So AI is like that. And the genie is probably already out of the bottle. Regulation will be almost impossible. So they're going to have to go to criminal regulation. If you get caught with an illegal AI, they're going to treat you as if you were a crack dealer or something. But that's enough about AI. We're talking about watches. HRM, modern Explorer 2s are already selling below retail. If prices keep going in this direction, I might buy myself a 14060. Oh, okay. Yeah, Explorer 2. I had an Explorer, the blackface Explorer 2, and I really liked it. And actually, I regret selling it, but it's hard to find a vintage Explorer 2 that the bezel isn't all rubbed out. I'm tempted to maybe get a Explorer 2 and then have a new bezel put on it, the vintage Explorer 2. I like the old red GMT hand. That the new Explorer 2 is selling it used close to retail, no surprise, because it's not a popular model. It's a nice model, which is why it's still bouncing around the retail price. But for that money, the average Rolex buyer would then slap a couple thousand more on that and buy themselves a sub, because the sub will get them what they perceive the attention that they need for their watch, I assume. But yeah, um, Datejust, I would imagine, isn't selling too hot right now. Last time I looked, they're only a couple thousand above retail. Um, of course, Daytonas and subs are going to always, I shouldn't say always, but for the foreseeable future, they're going to sell over retail because those are the desirable models, right? And now the Land-Dweller. But the Land-Dweller is going to sell out, and it's going to, of course, be bounced back out into the marketplace. So I'm guessing you'll see the Land-Dweller for 15 to 18,000 gray market, maybe higher on some of but it depends on how Rolex deploys it too. Let's hope that because they could put a barcode with a blockchain on it and know where every single watch is at all times. Rolex could control a lot of the gray market BS and shenanigans themselves directly. They just choose not to put the effort into it right now for whatever reason. But they with modern internet technology, they can track every single watch from the moment it leaves the factory and know where everything is at all times. Modern Explorer 2s, or yeah, we said that already. Polar or black, asks Elusive Man. I personally like the black, but um, there are a lot of people like the polar. The movement mensch, probably already mentioned, but did you sell off the regular Speedy once I got the Snoop? Yes. Once I knew I was getting the Snoop, I had a friend who had I told I was gonna get the Snoop, and he said, "Yeah, then sell me your Speedy." So he was waiting he was waiting to take it the moment, I, sold it. And, he even let me keep the leather strap. I had offered to let him have the leather strap with the metal strap, but he just, "No," because I think he intends to flip it, so he's happy with the metal bracelet. But that's good for me because now I'm gonna get the custom strap for this using the deployant buckle from the black leather and, get a custom strap with then the, factory metal buckle. So that'll be nice. Dr. Bob, I like the black dial Explorer too. Most people want the polar, it seems. Yeah, yeah. Well, the white it's a different, white face watches, old school and it's interesting, black face, more common looking. If you're gonna have a black face Rolex, it should be a sub. Johnny, surprised to see a Boucheron French high fashion, a bit like LVMH. Well, the high end people got to eat too. Dr. Bob, we need less AI and more natural intelligence. Oh, please. Natural stupidity. Like, no, I mean, I know you mean people, smart people, but the trouble is there are a lot of dumb people out there too. And the big problem with AI is it's, plus de change, plus de même chose. Garbage in, garbage out was a term back in the 70s. And it's the same with AI. You get a large language model and you're not training it properly. How do you know how accurate the results are going to be? Or let's say you're doing it with engineering and it's writing code. So you've got an AI writing code that you may or may not be able to understand. We're really starting to, wade into deep water with this. Elusive Man, the 90s version of the black dial and red GMT is great. Exactly. Beautiful watch. HRM, I've been looking at a 116523 Daytona for a couple of months. They used to be around 30. This hasn't sold for months at 13. Like I said, the market's soft right now. I'd make them an offer. Maybe they'll give it to you for 12.5 or 12. Ask them, say 12 and see what they say. You can always pick it up with a 13. But now the market's soft. And I do think that it will firm up. I don't think it may rise a lot in the near future because of the financial market uncertainty, but I could see it firming up, at least in the States, because of the higher prices at retail for a lot of the luxury pieces. But now is the time, in my humble opinion, or not so humble opinion, to go out and yeah, buy that vintage Snoopy Speedmaster, buy that vintage Apollo 17 Speedmaster, buy that vintage bubble back Rolex, buy that, vintage JLC ultra thin moon phase. There are a lot of really beautiful watches in the used market, and now's a good time to go get them. They don't have any tariffs on them. Oh, frying pan time. There you go. So I'm noticing we're at the top of the hour. As you know, I always ended it on the hour because better to end it while we're still on a roll than peter out and go hemming and hawing at the end. So HRM tariffs going to be rough for dealers in the U.S. Yes, they will. But yeah, we're going to end it for now. Like I said, next week I think we'll talk about watches and colors. I think and other things that are happening in this market space. But for now, we'll call it a day. Love you all. Have a fantastic week. And most importantly, have a nice evening. Thanks, everybody. And thanks, Dr. Bob. Take care, everyone. Have a great week. See you next week.